Socialism is founded on a beginning premise that was popularized by Karl Marx, that there is a progress of history, that through historical materialism, society would advance and meaningful progress would happen for people. Sadly, though, there is no certainty of a so-called progression of history. I'm Nathan Collins, bringing you the truth of Christ in a post-truth culture.
I'm sure most of you guys have probably seen by now the video that I did on Joshua Collins and some of the disappointment that I felt when it seemed as though he didn't know what he was doing when it came to electoral efficacy. And it made me think, like, I still haven't actually done any videos on how I want to establish socialism in the United States. And a lot of people have criticized me for that. And I keep saying, I'll get to it. Like, what would you do? Like, what's your actual game plan, you know? A lot of people, Destiny criticized me for this too. Destiny criticized me. Like, you want to talk about, like, this society, you want to talk about what's here, but you can't talk about how to get to that point, okay? So I want to talk about that, all right? I'm going to try and keep this as expedient as possible, all right? And we're going to do it using paint. But before we get to the paint, I need to talk about something very important to you. Okay? Why do I want to be a socialist? Okay? So on a very, very fundamental level, I get called a lot of things. Socialist, market socialist, libertarian, socialist, leftist, anarchist, anarcho-syndicalist, mutualist. There are a lot of things that I get called. Broadly speaking, here are my opinions, okay? The progress of history is slow, you know? Imagine we live in like a slave state, like Egypt, you know, back in 2000 BC or something like that. If I lived in such a society, do you think if I was intelligent enough to know what socialism was, I could meaningfully advocate for its implementation right then and there? Probably not. Because if we agree, generally speaking, with historical materialism, the idea is that the material relationships of society advance to a point where we can then make meaningful progress. Marx agreed that socialism was a necessary step in moving society forward, and I agree with him on that, because I think that socialism did a pretty excellent job of codifying the development of a modern industrial economy, which socialism can then take advantage of. Now, even if you don't agree generally with those ideas, even if that is the case, the fact remains nonetheless that, like, you can't just... Wait, what did I say? Whatever I said, I mean capitalism, my bad. I said socialism when I meant liberalism. Capitalism, my apologies. Socialism will overtake socialism. Well, that might happen too. Yeah. Non-stop warfare, comrades. Marx believed that capitalism had a purpose to serve, and I think I generally agree with that. I would also agree that feudalism was a necessary step in removing power away from, like, the divine right of absolute monarchs, and the divine right of absolute monarchs were probably a superior system to theological confederacies or the Roman Empire, maybe. There's a progression over time with history.
Theological confederacies were a progression from the Roman Empire? I don't think so.
And it's all very complicated, and I'm not a historian, so I'm not going to focus on that. I want to focus on today.
Even though I just told you all about history, never mind the history I just told you, I want to focus on today. Well, you can't know today without knowing what happened yesterday. There is a myth that is popular not only with socialists, but with anyone who remembers how history class is laid out in school. You start with this caveman and then, fast forward, pyramids, Roman Empire, blah, 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 bam, computers, we get to now. The progress of history is the way history is laid out to us and presented to you in school. If you want to see a real in-depth view of history and this historical progress fallacy, read the powerful works of Thomas Sowell. I'm going to briefly drop some bombs on this idea, but you should really check into his works. They're pretty great. All right, one of the fun facts I'm going to drop on you is the Indus Valley Civilization, which is where modern-day Pakistan and India are. This civilization existed around 3000 to 2000 BC, about 5,000 years ago. And they invented a centralized sewer system using gravity throughout their city, as well as their own version of flushing toilets. Something Europe would not have built to the same level until the 18th century, 4,000 years later. Even then, it was just beginning to be popularized. Even today, many who now live in Pakistan and India, the very area where this civilization existed, do not have to this day the same degree of infrastructure as this city did. The idea that there is this magical upward flow of history is simply not true. Depending upon the period, you could have a very advanced civilization and in another 100 years have a completely archaic, backward civilization. There is no guarantee of progress. Another fun fact, during the 100s AD, Rome during the ancient Roman Empire had 1 million people living in the city, a number that would not be topped by Europeans until the 1800s. And going back before the Roman Empire, in the 3rd century BC, Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth as well as calculated the Earth's tilt on its axis, being only a few percent off from the modern calculation today. He did this 2,300 years ago. So yeah, not everyone thought the Earth was flat until recently, unlike what you may have been led to believe in history class. There are so many things we could say about this. The mortality rate has fluctuated throughout history. For instance, back in 1994, a study looked at every man entered into the Oxford Classical Dictionary who lived in ancient Greece or Rome. Their ages of death were compared to men listed in the more recent Chambers Biographical Dictionary. Of 397 ancients in total, 99 died violently by murder, suicide, or in battle. Of the remaining 298, those born before 100 BC lived to a median age of 72 years. Those born after 100 BC lived to a median age of 66. The authors speculate that the prevalence of dangerous lead plumbing may have led to this apparent shortening of life. You know what the median age of those who died between 1850 and 1949 was? 71 years old. Just 1 year less than their pre-100 BC cohort. I could, of course, go on and on and on with endless amounts of facts, as well as many other historians. None of this information I gave is just fringy or unknown. This is all common knowledge that everyone should have been taught in history class, but we weren't. It's easier to paint a picture of caveman to spaceman, right? That's an easy picture to grasp and teach children, but it's not a correct picture of human history and should not be taught. Nonetheless, socialism is based off this premise that there is this progression of history, and socialism is just one piece on this endless chain towards utopia. This, of course, is predicated on their belief of history being true. If it's not true, then the whole thing starts to fall apart. Because if you believe that socialism is a piece of this endless progression that's proven throughout history, and it's not proven throughout history, then how do you know that your piece of progression is actually true? How do you know that the progression that you're in right now is going to keep on going forever? How do you know that another dark age is not going to happen? If anything's true, dark ages do happen, and they happen pretty consistently throughout history, just like pandemics. Everybody thinks it's golden, and then a pandemic comes and everybody says, how could this happen? Well, if you know anything about history, this is like Planet Earth 101. This always happens. This isn't like an unusual thing. So, all in all, first big reason socialism is false is the premise that history shows this progression, and therefore their evidence for believing in a continuing progression is that history shows it, when this is simply not true. History does not show this and does not give socialism any grounds to believe that it will happen. What I would like to ask Vaush is, where does he think the historical lineage is for the belief of workers' rights and that all people should be equal? Where does he think these ideas come from? Because there's a historical trail that leads back. Why care for people? Why care for these workers? Where does he think those ideas come from? Because they do have a historical backing, but that backing may be rooted in something he's not okay with. And that rooting comes from Christianity and Christ's impact on human history. If you want to know why even to care about the poor, why even to care about the common working man, that is a uniquely Christian idea. And there's a reason that socialism even had an environment to be cultivated and to grow in. That environment was created due to Christianity. Now, socialism has obviously skewed it and taken it much further down the line than Christianity ever would have allowed. But it doesn't matter nonetheless. It has its roots, however deep, comes from Christianity and its impact on Western thought and Western culture and Western values. These values are not universal in times or places, and this is easily demonstrable. So Vaush really should be looking into history, and maybe he just might see the power of Christ. Well, that's all for this episode, but if you like this episode, go ahead and subscribe and check out our other episodes as we address different issues in our culture and bring you the truth of Christ in a post-truth culture. Grace and peace, brothers and sisters. Best mug yet. Good choice, Mr. Beach. Good choice. Seriously, pick up his books. Thomas Sowell. Fantastic. Fantastic stuff. Is this in here? Am I actually mirroring it? Okay. Or blinding? Fantastic stuff. Thomas Sowell. Is that gonna... Boom! There he is! There he is. Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Read it, Mike. Read it. Read it and weep. You socialism fanatic.